Good afternoon all. I want to thank everybody who joins us. Today is May 11 and my name is Ola Tamanova. I'm with you today here in Ukrainian Media Center Ukraine Forum. It's been 10 years of the war and today is day 438 of the full-scale invasion of a homeland by the Russian aggressor, but still the life is going on and we continue to develop the sphere of our government services. And today we invited you to present the results of the monitoring of accessibility of this government services, and I want to introduce our speakers today. It's Mstyslav Banik, head of the Electronic Services Development at the Ministry of Digital Transformation of Ukraine, Volodymyr Brusilovskyy, Diia Support Project Manager, UNDP Ukraine, and joining us online are Tetiana Lomakina, Commissioner of the President of Ukraine for the Barrier-Free Environment, Dmytro Popov, a consultant on digital accessibility in the United Nations Development Program Ukraine. I hope everybody is seeing us clearly online. So, Mr. Mstyslav, first question, how important is this problem? Why did you come up with this monitoring? We know that it's the second time you do this survey. So what are our aspirations? What do we want? Thank you. It's good to be a person who opens this meeting today. I want to say one key thing. It's something that when we work together with United Nations Development Program on digitalization of services for Ukrainians, we talk, well, I will proceed from the general to more specific. So we're talking about accessibility. The full-scale war only corroborated that fact. Our digital services in the Diia application, the portal Diia, within more than a year, they became the main way of delivering documents to the people because it's physically impossible in the occupied territories, and the people who became internally displaced, for them it's impossible to provide those services for them offline because the bandwidth is quite narrow. So this is the general part, and this is what from where I want to proceed to the specificities about accessibility. It's not about people having access, but we know that there are people who need, for example, more profound functionalities of the applications, websites, first of all in terms of government services, because millions of Ukrainians are using them already, and that analysis, the testing that was going on under the guidance of United Nations Development Program in Ukraine, it's quite big, because those are the big markers that we have to work on. Let's be honest. The way it happens is you talk to a developer of a government website and they say everything is fine, and then it turns out something is going wrong, and it turns out only on the face when people start complaining, and we know that people are not always ready to complain, to say something like something that they cannot access something, and it becomes a problem that starts snowballing. So this testing is necessary to set the markers, to set the requirements, which way should we keep moving. On my end, I can say that Diia was not perfect in the beginning, and that there is a lot of work to be done yet, but we set up the list of requirements to be complied with for both mobile application and the portal, and there is a lot of improvements to be done again, and just one website out of 100 is 100% accessible, and it's a problem for the country. Moreover, due to the full-scale invasion, the military who were affected or who were injured, the civilians, what I mean is that the number of people who will need to access the government websites, this number of people will only grow. So talking about human-centric country, we're taking care of the people, and people should have access to all those services, and this is where we should put all our effort in. and I'm happy that all of our team got involved in development of this accessibility, and I'm happy to have this support by the United Nations Development Program with the support of the Swedish government in Ukraine. So thank you. Thank you. We know that this is not the first program which is supported by UNDP in Ukraine, and the results of implementation of such programs, we know, we're aware of them too. So what are the results that you expect? Do you observe any progress within these 2 years that this monitoring is going on? Thank you. You are right. The UNDP Ukraine supports a broad range of initiatives, not only in digital area. The Diia support project, we work there with the Office of the President, with the Ministry of Digitalization and number of other government agencies to make all the government services provided by the government, first of all, Diia, accessible to the most extent possible. Mstyslav already mentioned why, but again, I'll repeat it. We see that as the society is developing, the technologies of culture, technology, the digital services, they become the main source of digital services and information. And it's clear that the society, well, Ukrainian society, just like any other society, is made up of different people. It's not only about the inclusiveness, but and the people with disabilities. But for example, I have an impaired sight. I'm not disabled, but sometimes I feel it difficult to read some text in a mobile application or on a website, and we all have mothers, fathers, grandparents, and so on, who have the same problems. So this problem is getting bigger with the war, and we want that progress that is achieved by Ukraine in the sphere of digital transformation, in development of Diia and other areas. The result of this progress should be accessible to all the Ukrainians without exclusion, so that in 8 or 10 years, all of the Ukrainians receive digital services, and one person just is on this offline ghetto without access to the cool and comfortable, convenient digital services. So we're happy to have this support from the Office of the President and the Ministry of Digitalization, and our goal is to make sure that after a certain period we can take pride not only in Diia and use its services, but that we understand that every single Ukrainian can have access to those services. And it doesn't happen so that as we open the private company within 1 minute, or when we receive some social services, so that we know that some person should stand in line without having access to those services. This is not what we want to happen. So we think it's important. We understand that during the war, obviously, there are more priorities, other priorities, but still we don't want to lose the momentum, don't want to lose the potential, the dynamics that we have achieved already. We hope that shortly the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine will adopt the resolution which stipulates the requirements to all the government websites, applications and information systems, which obliges all the government agencies to make those services accessible. We need to provide the indicator for the government to make sure that the government complies with its obligations, and we will work with the civil sector, with the public sector, with the businesses to expand those services and requirements not only to the government but also to the monopolists, to the big businesses. If a person cannot buy a ticket in Ukrzaliznytsia, they don't feel better that Ukrzaliznytsia is a joint stock company and not a government company or something like that. So we have to take into account all the general global standards that are developing, and our role here is to help all the actors, all the participants, everybody who's involved in this sphere, to have them work more efficiently, and so that we could take pride in those cool, convenient services, including Diia. Thank you very much, Ms. Tetiana. I'm happy to have you join our conversation as a person who is dealing with barrier-free environment and somebody who implements this barrier-free environment in our reality for all the categories of our population. So how do you track, as the Commissioner of the President, how do you track the accessibility of the websites and government services. What do you observe in this field? Do we have any progress? We're not hearing you. Oh, now we are. Can you hear me? Good afternoon, everybody. Well, really, the war made some of the matters more urgent for us, and while we're living in the situation of the full-scale invasion, we've all felt how important it is to have all the digital copies of all of our documents, our IDs, how important it is to get the quick access to the government websites, to the important information, to digital services. And in a situation like this, we have to make sure that all the Ukrainians have such access, so that from any place in Ukraine a person can get connected and get all the services they need, and the rights of people who live with mental impairments, with sight impairments, hearing impairments. We have to make sure their rights are adhered to as well. And now we're starting to change something when we face the understanding, when we realize that something is not in accord with our expectations, with the requirements, and this monitoring that we do. We see that when people who develop the websites, they don't quite understand the needs of the people who live with some types of impairments, and this information may become a type of tool for them, an instrument to understand what exactly they need to change, what the website should look like, so it's convenient and useful for everybody. And this is about opening new opportunities. And now in Ukraine, there is a monitoring going on by the Minister of Information Policy and Culture, but those instruments that the UNDP is offering for monitoring, I hope they will be used. They will be used by the government authorities, because those tools are more up to date, and they don't only appraise what does not comply, but I see they provide also specific recommendations on what has to be done to create all the necessary conditions, to create the environment for accessibility. And Mr. Volodymyr already mentioned the document that is being prepared. It will be a mandatory document for all the government authorities, all the government agencies, to create the websites which would be convenient for use by any people with any types of disabilities and impairments. So we hope it will be happening quite soon. But on the other hand, we would like to draw everyone's attention to this document, all the ministries. This is going to be a great job. We will have to process a lot of digital content and to convert our government websites in a new way, but it's about new opportunities and for the disabled people, and we have to do this. Well, Mr. Dmytro, are you with us? We would like to proceed to the results of our monitoring. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm happy to get involved in this process, the process of implementation of digital accessibility in Ukraine, and I'm presenting the second summary of the second survey as to the accessibility of the 100 government websites. Slide number 2, please. I would like to emphasize that within the last period, apart from the monitor, upon the initiative of the Ministry of Digital Transformation, with the support of UNDP and the government of Sweden, the state standard 301-549 was established, was implemented, which complies with the international standard. There were also trainings for the government officials. There is a web show about the web accessibility in Diia, and there is the official Ukrainian translation on the web accessibility, WCG 2.1. That's the main manual of the global of the global guidelines, which sets forth the requirement for the Ukrainian state standard 2, which were approved recently. So slide 2, please. As to the methods of the survey, it was developed back in 2021 before the first monitoring. And back then we wanted to evaluate the accessibility of the websites, the websites of the government authorities, government agencies, to identify the discrepancies and to rectify them. Also, we wanted to assist to the rectification of such mistakes and errors. This year we also wanted to see the dynamics of the results. So what changed within this last year, whether it became better or it became worse. Slide number 4, please. The technique includes the basic accessibility indicators. The first 7 indicators are checked with the browser plugin. Is the contrast, alternative text availability, availability of the accessible text for hyperlinks, the marks for the buttons, the marks for the fields, program identification of the language, and absence of mistakes in the page. And indicators 8 to 10, they relate to the keyboard navigation, so they are checked manually. So is there proceeding to the main content, accessibility of the interface, and marking by the keyboard. It's very important because the people with the impaired sight who use the screen reader and people with impaired motorics, they don't use the mouse, and accessibility through the keyboard is a very important requirement of accessibility. So the results, please, slide number 5. According to the results of our survey, only one website was able to comply with all the 10 indicators. 3% of the websites, they have high level of accessibility, 17% they have sufficient level of accessibility. I apologize. So 17% have sufficient level accessibility, 53% average level, and 27% low level of basic accessibility. Slide number 6, please. So the leaders were the websites, the leaders in accessibility, the electronic cabinet of the transporter, the website of the Kharkiv regional administration, and the website Diia Without Barriers, which was launched in 2022, is the part of the Diia ecosystem. And it's very good that barrier-free environment is one of the leaders in terms of accessibility. The next slide, number 7, please. So to comparing the results, the websites that demonstrate the better dynamics, who have the best dynamics within the last 2 years in terms of accessibility, those who improved their indicators, are these websites of the Ministry of Energy of Ukraine, the website of Lviv Regional Administration, and the site of the Register of Education Activity Entities. So when we were checking the other 100 websites, we identified that 13 of them just don't operate, so we replaced them with yet another 13, and the further results that we were comparing, we were taking them only for the rest 87 websites. Slide number 8, please. The indicators which were implemented to the lesser extent, that were complied with by the least number of websites. First is the first is the quick access to the main content of the page. When the readers from the keyboard, when they want to start reading the content, they need to click on tab key multiple times to proceed to the main content of the page, because the website, it has the menu and other elements of the page. So when a person clicks tab for the first time, they proceed right away to the main content of the page. This is the requirement of the standard, and only 16% of the websites, they have this mechanism. Another component, which is actually indicator number 1, the sufficient contrast. It happens so that frequently it's a problem too. Only 28% of such websites don't have such a problem, and the rest 72, they have insufficient contrast that may complicate the content perception by the people with the sight impairment. Yet another element which is not always complied with is the available text for all the hyperlinks. The links is the element that you can click on and to switch to another page, like a banner or social network pages, and they have a graphic element, but they do not have text element. And the people who use the screen reader, they cannot find out what kind of hyperlink it is and where it leads to. So the developers should add the alternative text or the hidden marker, so that people with impaired sight could find out what kind of hyperlink it is. And unfortunately, only 30% of the website reached the compliance, achieved the compliance with this component. Slide number 9, please. So comparing the results, we can see that the high level of accessibility, I apologize, high level of accessibility, it's only 3% of the websites who have this high level, but it's still 2% more than the year earlier. The sufficient level of accessibility is 17% set, and it's plus 5% compared to the previous year. The average accessibility level is 53%, which is again 5% more than the year before, and low level is only 27%, which is 12% less than during the previous year in surveys. So all the levels have sufficient have positive dynamics except for the low level accessibility. So the number of the websites with the low level accessibility decreased. Slide number 10, please. Also, comparing the components, we can see that almost in all these elements, all these indicators, we have positive dynamics. We have the bigger dynamics in component number 6, the automatic identification of language, which is very good. It's very important for the people who use the screen reader and for the people who use automatic translation in the web browser, or so automatic identification of the language matters for them a lot. Also, there is positive dynamics in indicator number 1, 8 points. And we also observe the positive dynamics in all of the indicators except for indicator number 7. It fell to 41% from 44%. This is the indicator that is responsible for the errors in the code, and it's about the fields of accessibility. And in the new websites which are being created now, or which are being modernized, the developers, they try to use this technology there, but in absence of experience they tend to commit mistakes. However, the key summary is that in all the levels, in all the indicators, we have positive dynamics. It's very good because it's the martial law, the war is going on, and we cannot really allocate so much resources to develop the accessibility. So upon the results of the study, please slide number 11, we developed the recommendations for the owners of the websites with the low and medium level of accessibility. We recommend to initiate modernization of services and to take into account the requirements of the citizens with limited mobility. For the owners of the websites with sufficient and high level of accessibility, I apologize. So I apologize. The first recommendation was for the owners of the websites with low and medium level of basic accessibility, and for the owners of the websites with the sufficient and high level of accessibility, we recommend to take into account the components and the indicators which were not taken into account before during their next update and modernization. And for the owners of all the websites, we recommend to periodically fulfill the audit of accessibility and to timely correct identified discrepancies, because the accessibility is not a permanent thing. Today you may have your site accessible and then your content manager may commit a mistake and then add, for example, an image without alternative text, and this accessibility will be ruined. This is why it's important to have those audits and monitoring on a regular basis. More detail about the barriers that we come across can be found in our web show. It's called Web Dostupность, Web Accessibility. It's posted on Diia portal, and I appreciate your attention, and I will answer all the questions that you may have. Mr. Dmytro, thank you for your presentation. We will probably have first questions to Mr. Mstyslav. We've seen that there is certain dynamics, but talking about the results, there is still a lot of work to be done. We're still at a quite low level of accessibility in terms of our online resources of our government services. So the question will be to you as to the persons who deal with those processes in the state. Do you have any levers to expedite these processes? Do you have any KPIs that you want to achieve within the next year, for example, to comply with some indicators next year, to improve the accessibility, say, next year? Specifically what you said, Mstyslav, that it's quite important during the war for us. Well, I will start from the end probably. So inside we're already working on it. We're working in the portal and in mobile application. So the main lever is the legislation which is about to be adopted. So this is the story which is, it's mandatory to be complied with, and the government authorities will have to bring it in compliance. I mean, their websites to bring them in compliance with the requirements developed. Ms. Tetiana, please. Can you hear me? Yeah, we can hear you. What I would like to say is that really we need to sort out this document, finally to have it adopted, this resolution, and it will oblige the government websites, but there is still a lot of work to be done to create accessibility for any company, for any organization that works in Ukraine and provides services. I mean, pharmaceutical companies, the companies which provide banking services, all types of services, they need to be accessible, and we will need to work on the relevant legislation, so there is still a lot of work to be done. Thank you very much, dear. Just in brief, just a couple of words. I completely agree with my colleagues. UNDP is ready to support the further development in this sector, including the development of the draft law. One thing to add is only, we know that in Ukraine, the rules that are approved as legislation, they are sometimes they just do not work because they're not complied with.
So I hope this law will be adopted soon. We have to keep working on that, but in our opinion, besides legislation, we have to continue working on training government officials, on we have to continue the monitoring, we have to continue working with the public sector, with the businesses, so that everybody understands the necessity of accessibility, the importance of accessibility. I think it's clear enough, but still not to have only formal requirement, but to have this mission to have the government services available. I mean, this there should be understanding by the top level government officials, because we see this initiative on part of say Ministry of Digital Transformation. We see the understanding on part of Tetiana, but there should be understanding in the wide crowds of the decision makers. This is the key thing, so that we can take pride in our high quality digital services in after a certain period, to make sure that all those things are accessible to all the Ukrainians. Thank you, dear colleagues. If you have any questions, please join our conversation. Any comments, any questions? We've been talking today about the people with sight impairments. So is it the same story with the people with the hearing impairment, or the dynamics differ to a certain extent? Well, it's quite simple here. Fortunately, in the world, there were a lot of people working on this matter. And so talking about the standard of accessibility, it's a standard that survived a lot of evolutions. This standard is approved on the level of the European Union countries, and it takes into account the sight and hearing and motorics impairment, cognitive impairments. It takes into account everything. This standard keeps evolving, it keeps developing, and fortunately we don't have to invent our bicycle. It's enough just to do, or it's sufficient to do what the European countries do. They adopt it on the level of the European Parliament resolution. They approved this standard. So apart from this accessibility matter, it's also harmonization with European legislation. So we just have to take it and to start its operation in Ukraine, because when we start inventing our initiatives, it turns out to be not quite productive sometimes in Ukraine. So now that the global society, global community is working on the standards in the area of digital accessibility, we are convinced that this move will allow the people with some impairments, or without impairments, just with just worse side, that they have all the access to all the digital services being developed in Ukraine. So to summarize it, I will probably ask Mr. Mstyslav. We understand when the legislation is being developed, it may not include all the requirements, all the components to make sure it operates smoothly, and that the final recipient of the services receives them in a high quality manner. So as a ministry, are you going to get involved in development of any auxiliary materials which will help our government authorities to implement those changes really, but not formally? Well, in a view of the experience of the last years, when most part of the government agencies, as they develop their websites, they come to us for advice. I think they will continue doing it with the accessibility too, but just like Volodymyr mentioned it, and like Dmytro presented it, there is no, it's not like a field for creativity, but there is a comprehensive list of requirements that have to comply with. And obviously the representatives of the government agencies, they obviously may get lost on this path to lose their guiding light, but there is in fact a roadmap or a checklist. How do I call it right? There's just a checklist that you have to comply with, and it will work. Thank you very much for this meeting, for this conversation. I hope that we will be advancing in this matter shortly. We're already taking pride in the way our government services, our online services are operating, and I hope they will be accessible to everybody. I appreciate everyone's interest in this topic. I want to thank our speakers, and our next briefing is at 1300, and we will be talking about a topic of not lesser importance. We will be talking with the training programs for the government officials for reintegration of Crimea. So stay tuned, work together for our victory, and glory to Ukraine.